and he relied on an old dashcam mounted beneath his rearview mirror to track mileage and protect himself from liability. Ryland preferred quiet roads, and he often took a narrow side highway that ran between pine forest and empty service pullouts. His friends said he liked that road because it gave him time to think without interruption. On a cool night in early autumn, Ryland left a job site later than normal. He told a coworker he planned to drive straight home rather than stay in town. He looked tired but steady, and he mentioned nothing about trouble. He bought fuel at a station near the highway entrance, grabbed a bottle of water, then headed toward the dim mountain road he used every week. His last confirmed call came through his work phone at roughly 9, and he said he expected to arrive home in 2 hours. He never arrived. A county deputy found his truck the next morning parked at a slight angle on the shoulder of a forest stretch that saw little overnight travel. The engine was cold, the doors were locked, and Ryland's tools sat neatly in the truck bed. There were no signs of a struggle and no indication he left the truck willingly. Search teams combed the woods for 2 days, but found nothing beyond faint footprints leading a short distance into the trees. Those prints vanished in a patch of dry needles where the ground was too firm to hold detail. The truck remained in evidence storage for months until the case grew cold. Eventually, it was transferred to a private towing lot. The dashcam stayed attached inside the cab, and no one checked the memory card again until nearly 8 years later when the towing company changed ownership. During a routine inventory sweep, an employee named Soren Lay removed the old dashcam because it rattled when he shut the door. He decided to check the card out of curiosity, and the first playable clip froze him in place. The file began with ordinary night driving. The headlights cast narrow beams over cracked asphalt as the forest shifted around the truck. A low hum filled the microphone, likely from the engine. Ryland's voice appeared once near the start, and he sounded annoyed about a vehicle that seemed to be trailing him for several miles. His tone was controlled, yet it carried an edge of confusion. He asked if the driver behind him needed to pass, then muttered that the vehicle kept fading out of view and returning again. A few minutes into the video, the headlights from a trailing vehicle appeared at the far edge of the frame. The light glared briefly, then vanished as if the driver dipped their beams or pulled back suddenly. The dashcam's date stamp suggested it matched the time frame of Ryland's disappearance, though the digits were partially corrupted. About 20 seconds later, Ryland whispered that he saw the trailing vehicle again through his side mirror. His voice tightened as he said the truck behind him had a broken fog light on the passenger side. That detail mattered because similar reports surfaced around that same highway during preceding months. The recording shifted as the truck rounded a bend. The microphone picked up a metallic rattle from the passenger door, followed by a faint rustling sound that seemed out of place. Analysts later believed the rustling came from something brushing along the truck exterior. Ryland's breathing quickened, and he said someone had stepped onto the road ahead. The camera captured no figure, yet the truck slowed sharply. Ryland spoke again, stating that he recognized something about the person's movement. His next sentence was barely audible, and investigators could not confirm whether he said the word drugged or dragged. The audio fractured when the trailing headlights suddenly filled the dashcam frame. The glare overwhelmed the sensor, and the clip flickered between brightness and near darkness. Ryland cursed under his breath and said he would pull into the next service turnout. The microphone caught the heavy thump of the truck hitting loose gravel. The truck angled toward the right shoulder, where a small turnout opened beneath leaning pines. The camera tilted as if the mounting bracket loosened. The final 2 seconds before the cut showed a blurred outline near the driver's side window. That outline appeared tall, with narrow shoulders, though the frame lacked enough clarity to define facial details. The dashcam file ended abruptly. The final second recorded a strange 3-tone pattern that technicians believed came from the dashcam's internal warning system. Older models produced that sound during sudden vibration, but the pattern also triggered if the device detected manual interference. The combination of glare, sudden movement, and the abrupt cutoff suggested someone may have touched the dashcam before the recording terminated. Investigators re-examined witness reports from the night Ryland vanished. Several drivers traveling the mountain road claimed they saw a dark truck with a broken passenger fog light weaving across lanes. One driver described the truck slowing near the service turnout where Ryland's vehicle was later found. None of the witnesses could identify the driver, and the truck disappeared before deputies reached the area. A retired ranger who lived near the bend reported hearing a loud engine rev shortly after 9:30, followed by quiet for nearly an hour. The discovery of the dashcam file renewed interest in the case. Investigators mapped the route Ryland took that night and matched his comments in the clip to mile markers along the forest road. The moment he mentioned the broken fog light aligned with a curve known for concealment due to heavy tree cover. The point where he slowed matched the turnout used historically by maintenance crews who serviced power lines. That turnout had a narrow footpath leading deeper into the woods, though the path was overgrown by the time search teams inspected it again. The dashcam audio mentioning recognition gained particular interest. Ryland had completed several contracts in the same region during the months before his disappearance, and he frequently worked near remote properties. Detectives theorized that he may have encountered the same vehicle or person previously. His coworker mentioned an incident where Ryland complained about someone idling along a worksite access road late at night. Ryland believed the driver observed him for several minutes before speeding away. That report never escalated because Ryland dismissed it after a few days. Advanced audio processing on the final seconds of the clip revealed a faint background voice overlapping Ryland's last words. The voice spoke too quietly to capture full phrases, though analysts isolated a short fragment that sounded like "keep him there" or "keep it there." They could not determine if the voice came from inside the truck or through the partially open window. The possibility of a second person near the vehicle strengthened the idea that Ryland had pulled over because he believed he could talk to whoever stepped into the road. The three-tone warning pattern at the end of the clip became a focal point. Dashcam specialists explained that the pattern activated when the camera detected physical contact strong enough to tilt the lens. This aligned with the blurred outline near the window. Investigators believed someone reached into the cab or struck the dashcam mount, causing the device to shut off. They compared the timing of the audio cutoff with the impression marks found on the driver's side door, which appeared years earlier during the original inspection. Those marks seemed consistent with someone bracing a hand or tool against the doorframe. Though the dashcam file did not reveal a face or plate number, it provided the clearest sequence of events leading to Ryland's disappearance. It confirmed that he felt watched long before he pulled into the turnout and that someone approached his truck at the exact moment the recording ended. It also established that the trailing vehicle appeared intentionally evasive, repeatedly hiding its lights and adjusting distance. The file now sits in a secure archive at the county office. Investigators revisit it periodically, studying the brief seconds that captured Ryland's warning. They say the clip reflects a man who realized something was wrong, but still believed he could manage the situation. Locals who travel the mountain road at night still talk about the broken fog light that appeared in several witness reports and the possibility that the driver behind it learned the forest well enough to disappear without trace. The warning hidden in that old dashcam file continues to shape how the case is understood, offering a glimpse into those final moments when headlights, shadows, and a sudden outline at the driver window converged into one unanswered mystery. What this abandoned motel closet was hiding. An old desert motel was weeks from demolition when workers opened a closet in one of the back rooms and uncovered something that forced an investigation into a case many people had forgotten. That closet sat behind a warped door in a corner unit that rarely rented out, and the discovery inside it changed how investigators understood a disappearance from years earlier. Taryn Isley was a 32-year-old field surveyor who often stayed in small roadside motels during long environmental assessment jobs. She traveled alone most weeks, and her company booked her into older motels because they were inexpensive and usually quiet. On a warm afternoon in late spring, she checked into the Suncrest Motor Lodge, a property near the edge of a small desert town that had lost business as newer hotels opened along the highway. Taryn stayed there once before and remembered the rooms being basic but reliable. Her goal for the day was simple. She planned to organize soil samples, send a few reports, then rest before an early drive to the next survey site. She dropped her bags onto the bed, opened the curtains, and called her supervisor to confirm the next morning's route. Her tone in that call seemed cheerful, and there was nothing unusual about her routine. She walked down to the vending machines an hour later, waved politely at the clerk behind the counter, then returned to her room. Taryn did not answer calls the next morning. Her supervisor tried repeatedly before contacting the motel. The clerk knocked but received no reply. He used a spare key and found the room undisturbed with her belongings arranged neatly. Her truck was still parked outside. There was no sign of forced entry, and nothing indicated she left willingly. A search team examined the property for 2 days but found no trace of her. The case joined a short list of local disappearances that lacked clear leads. Years passed until the new highway project selected the Suncrest Motor Lodge site for demolition. A renovation crew entered the rooms to remove fixtures, and worker Jolyn Red pulled at a closet door in one of the corner units. The hinges creaked loudly because the door had swollen from years of heat. Dust billowed into the room as the door opened. Inside, Jolyn noticed a thin layer of drywall dust across the floor and something wedged behind a loose panel near the bottom. He pulled the panel outward and revealed a narrow space that ran behind the closet wall. Inside that space lay a folded work jacket, a disposable camera, and a small handheld recorder with a cracked casing. A motel inventory sheet from more than 10 years earlier was tucked beneath the jacket. The items appeared undisturbed, and the motel owner confirmed that the closet had never been repaired or altered during that period. Investigators took the items and examined them in a controlled environment. The disposable camera contained 8 undeveloped frames. Technicians processed the film and recovered images that showed portions of motel hallways, an empty parking lot at night, and one blurred frame taken from inside a room. The angle of that interior photo matched the layout of the room where Taryn stayed. Time codes were faded, but the chemical degradation suggested the film dated from the same period as her disappearance. The recorder held a short audio clip. Most of it contained background static. Near the middle, a faint voice whispered that someone had used the service corridor again and that footsteps had passed the room twice. The voice mentioned hearing a key scrape against the outer door. The final seconds captured a soft metallic sound. Analysts believed it was the same type of sound made by the old utility keys used by maintenance staff at the motel during that era. Detectives interviewed former employees, including a retired maintenance worker named Hollis Greer, who remembered a narrow service corridor that ran behind several rooms. It allowed staff to access plumbing and wiring without entering guest spaces. Hollis said the corridor had several offshoots that were later sealed when the motel changed ownership. He recalled that the corner rooms often had issues with water lines, and those repairs required him to use the hidden access points. Witness statements from long-term residents of the town helped rebuild the timeline. A woman who lived near the motel reported seeing a man wearing a dark jacket walking along the rear service path the night Taryn vanished. She remembered hearing the sound of a heavy door opening, but did not see where the man went afterward. Another witness recalled a truck idling behind the dumpster area around the same time, though the witness could not identify the driver or the truck model. Detectives compared the jacket found in the hidden space with old staff records. The jacket style matched uniforms issued to maintenance workers before the motel changed management. A faded tag inside showed partial initials that could not be confirmed. When investigators questioned Hollis about the uniform, he said his jackets were collected by management when he retired and that none were missing from his inventory. He admitted that a few part-time workers may have used his tools during night shifts, though he could not recall names with certainty. As investigators mapped the layout of the service corridors, they determined that the hidden panel connected directly to the wall behind the room Taryn had occupied. Evidence showed the panel had been opened and closed repeatedly over many years. Scratches along the inner frame suggested someone accessed the space using a narrow pry tool. The recorder's audio clip mentioning footsteps matched the idea that someone used the corridor that night. The strongest clue came from the 8th photograph on the camera. It showed a partial reflection in the room's television screen. The figure appeared to hold the camera at chest height, and the outline suggested a person of medium build wearing a uniform-style jacket consistent with the one in the closet. The reflection was too blurred to identify facial features, but investigators noted a metal badge clipped near the collar. The motel owner confirmed that staff during that time used metal badges with their position titles. Piecing the evidence together, investigators believed someone with access to the service corridor entered Taryn's room late that night. They theorized that Taryn heard something in the hallway, began recording out of caution, then placed the camera and recorder near the closet when she sensed movement behind the wall. The person who entered may have realized she had documented something and hid the items inside the access space before leaving. The absence of signs of struggle suggested she may have been led out of the room under some pretense. The discovery of the hidden items did not solve the case entirely, yet it offered the clearest explanation for why no evidence appeared in the original search. Investigators concluded that the service corridor created an unnoticed route into and out of the room. The corridor's outdated design and its connection to locked utility rooms provided a path for someone who knew the building well. When demolition began weeks later, locals gathered to watch the old motel fall. Many said the building never felt right, especially the corner units that stayed empty for long periods. The closet in that abandoned room had concealed items that kept a missing person case alive, offering a glimpse into the final hours of someone who deserved answers. The motel is gone now, but the evidence from that closet remains in an archive box at the county office. Investigators still revisit it when reviewing cold cases, and they say the discovery proved that quiet places often hold the loudest secrets. The note found inside that highway trash can. A road crew found a folded scrap of paper inside a dented highway trash can, and the message on it raised questions that have never fully settled. That note appeared during a routine cleanup shift along a quiet desert stretch where almost nothing ever happens. Its words seemed rushed and uneven, and the final line pushed investigators toward a case that had quietly stalled. Mara Tisdale was a 33-year-old supply driver who usually took the same 200-mile route through open desert. She left the depot before sunrise, and she expected an easy run with one stop for fuel and another for paperwork. Mara liked the silence that came with early driving, and she used those hours to clear her thoughts before the day grew hectic. Her dispatcher remembered that she sounded relaxed during her check-in call that morning, and nothing seemed out of place. Her plan shifted when she noticed a small silver sedan pulled onto the shoulder about 60 miles from the nearest town. The hazard lights blinked in an irregular pattern, and Mara slowed because instinct told her something was wrong. She stepped out and called toward the car, but no one answered. She noticed a faint ringtone inside the vehicle, and the sound echoed in the dry air with strange clarity. Mara said later that she believed someone had left in a hurry because a door stood slightly open and a jacket lay across the seat. She reported the abandoned car to Highway Patrol, then waited for a trooper to arrive. Trooper Len Coates reached the scene after 20 minutes, and he agreed that the car looked recently occupied. He found a phone inside with a cracked screen, but the battery had died. He also found a fuel receipt printed the previous evening from a nearby station. Coates logged the vehicle for towing, and a search team walked a narrow radius along the shoulder. They found only footprints in the loose dirt that stopped abruptly near the drainage ditch. The sedan belonged to a 31-year-old lab technician named Orrin Kay, who lived in a small desert town 2 hours away. Orrin was known for keeping to himself, and he rarely traveled beyond a short commute between his apartment and his workplace. He had left work early the previous day, and his supervisor said he looked distracted while finishing a final inventory check. A neighbor later reported hearing his car leave late that night, though the neighbor did not see him. The case gained momentum a week later when a highway cleanup crew inspected a rest stop trash can about 10 miles from where the sedan had been found. Worker Jace Renner removed a layer of fast food wrappers, then spotted a folded piece of yellow paper wedged against the inner rim. He unfolded it carefully because the paper felt damp. The writing looked shaky, and the message mentioned being followed by a man driving a dark truck with tinted rear windows. The writer said he feared the driver had waited near his apartment for hours, and the final line urged whoever found the note to check the camera near the north ramp. Investigators revisited the rest stop and located the camera mentioned in the note, Though its recording unit malfunctioned during the night, Oren vanished. Technicians recovered partial frames that showed the outline of a person placing something in the trash can. The figure moved quickly and kept a hood drawn low. The images were too blurry to confirm identity, but the timestamp narrowed their timelines significantly. Based on the angle of the shadow, investigators believed the figure arrived shortly after sunrise on the day the sedan was found. Detectives spoke with staff at the fuel station, noted in the receipt. A manager remembered a customer matching Oren's description who bought coffee and left in a hurry shortly before closing. The customer asked if anyone else had been in recently, and the manager said that a dark pickup had idled outside for several minutes before driving off. Witness description of the truck matched the one mentioned in the note. Further interviews revealed that a similar truck had been reported twice near Oren's apartment complex in the week before his disappearance. Both reports came from residents who noticed the truck making slow passes at night. Investigators searched Oren's apartment and found handwritten pages inside a drawer near the kitchen. They were personal notes that described a growing suspicion of being watched, and some lines referred to a sound outside his window during several late nights. One page described a man who seemed familiar, though Oren could not recall where he had seen him. The writing style on the apartment notes matched the style on the paper from the trash can, based on a comparison by a handwriting consultant. The team traced Oren's final hours through bank activity and cell tower data. His last confirmed message came through a workgroup chat where he said he needed to check something before returning home. His car traveled west out of town around midnight, then stopped briefly near his workplace before heading toward the highway. Investigators believed he suspected someone was following him and attempted to reach a more populated area, but changed direction after seeing the same truck behind him. Evidence suggested he pulled over to gather his thoughts or write the note before deciding to continue toward the rest stop. The biggest breakthrough came when an off-duty firefighter named Rowan Spence recalled seeing a dark truck speed away from the rest stop around the same time the figure appeared on the camera. Rowan had stopped for water during an early morning drive, and he noticed the truck because its rear lights flickered as if a wire was loose. He thought the driver seemed tense. Rowan did not see any other vehicles nearby, and his account aligned with the timeframes established through the partial footage. Despite these leads, the investigation slowed when no clear suspect emerged. Reports about the truck led to several interviews, but no matches. The sedan offered no fingerprints other than Oren's, and the phone provided no additional clues after examination. His coworkers believed he worried too much about security protocols at the lab, though none of them saw signs of paranoia or danger. Investigators theorized that Oren may have recognized someone from a past incident, which triggered genuine fear. They found no record of legal disputes or personal threats, yet the notes suggested he felt targeted by someone who knew his routine. The note inside the highway trash can became the central piece of evidence in a case filled with quiet gaps. Its rushed handwriting captured a few minutes of panic from a man who believed he had run out of options. The mention of the camera helped narrow the timeline, though the malfunction kept investigators from confirming the figure's identity. The case remains open, and the note sits inside an archive box with other items from that morning. The highway crew still works that stretch every week, and they sometimes mention the day the note appeared in an ordinary trash can beside an empty rest stop. They say it reminded them that people often leave traces only when fear outruns caution. The story has stayed alive among locals who still watch for a dark truck on the long road between towns, even though no one has seen one in years. The footage found behind that locked service closet, a quiet clip from an old maintenance camera, is the earliest known piece connected to this event, and it shows a locked service closet that should not have held anything unusual. That clip was later used by investigators who tried to understand what happened to a junior technician named Laron Pike, whose shift ended early in late autumn. They found the footage behind that same door after it had been sealed for weeks by building security. Laron Pike was 28 with a steady job as a technician at a mid-rise office block on the edge of a mid-sized city. He handled routine inspections and spent most days checking air units and replacing worn switches. On the day of the incident, he arrived before sunrise, and his plan was simple because he wanted to finish early and meet a friend for dinner. He logged his tasks on a small clipboard, then headed to the lower floors where a string of power flickers had been reported. The first sign that something was shifting came after he checked an electrical panel near the freight hall because he noticed a soft tapping that came from the service corridor behind him. It was not loud, but it was steady enough to make him pause, because the building rarely had any staff in that wing at that hour. He walked toward the hallway and found the locked service closet that should have been empty because it stored old filters and spare metal duct sheets. The tapping stopped the moment he approached the door, and he made a small note about it for later. He moved on with his list and kept checking units across the floor, but the strange pause near that closet lingered in his head. Later that morning, a cleaning worker named Pella Hargreaves reported that she saw a light under that closet door, even though the switch inside had been disconnected earlier that month. Her test was simple because she knocked on the door and the faint light flickered out immediately. She told Lerone when she ran into him near the supply desk, and he wrote down her statement next to his earlier note. The building manager joined them once the reports were passed to the office, and they all went back to the service corridor to check the closet again. The door was still locked, and the manager said no one had a reason to enter it because the master inventory had been moved months earlier. They decided to leave it alone until they finished the primary checks on the power network. Laurent helped with that sweep, and they found no major faults, although a few circuit logs showed brief voltage drops near the same hallway. Investigators later reviewed Laurent's phone notes because he took quick photos of each panel during his shift. They found a single blurred image of the service closet taken in the early afternoon. The reflection in the metal doorframe looked off because it showed a thin line of motion near the bottom corner. It was unclear if that motion came from inside or if someone passed through the corridor at that moment. They checked the corridor camera to confirm, but the camera had been down for 3 days due to a loose wire. The most significant lead emerged after lunch when Laurent told a colleague named Jarrell Penn that he heard something shift inside the closet as he passed through the hall again. Jarrell thought it might be a rodent because that wing often had small gaps behind the old walls. They planned to check it together after finishing a test on a cooling system. That test ended around mid-afternoon, and they returned to the closet with a simple plan to unlock it and take a quick look. According to Jarrell's later statement, there was a faint vibration under their feet when they approached the door. It felt like a small generator starting up in another room, although no system in that wing should have been active at that hour. Laurent unlocked the door and pulled it open, and a rush of cold air slid out like someone had left a window open inside. The room had no windows and no active vents, yet their breath fogged slightly as they stepped forward. Inside, they found a portable monitor on a crate that should not have been there because no one had logged that equipment for months. The monitor was connected to a small camera that had been mounted near a pile of duct sheets. The camera pointed toward a narrow gap in the back wall that looked like an old access hole for cables. The monitor screen flickered with static for a few seconds before showing a short clip that repeated every time the image reset. The clip showed the back wall from the same angle, but it displayed a timestamp from late summer and showed someone stepping into the frame. The person wore a reflective vest and held a hammer. They looked like a contractor, but no clear face was visible because of the angle. The clip ended as soon as the figure leaned toward the gap and seemed to tap twice on the wall. The tap resembled the sound Laurent heard earlier that morning. Investigators later tried to match the uniform to any registered contractors, but no record of that vest color or tool brand matched recent work orders. They traced the monitor's serial number and found it belonged to a batch that had been retired 2 years earlier. The crate also held a folder with printed maintenance sheets that ended mid-page, and the ink looked uneven, like someone had rushed through the printer without letting it warm up. The strangest part involved the temperature logs stored in the main system because they showed a sudden drop in that closet around the time Laren and Jarrell opened the door. The drop lasted less than a minute, but fell far lower than normal for that insulated space. Technicians tried to reproduce the effect during later tests, but found no way to drive the temperature down without active equipment. The final known movement of Laren came when he told Jarrell he wanted to check the narrow gap in the back wall because he thought it might lead to an unused conduit. Jarrell said he stepped out to grab a flashlight from the supply cart while Laurent stayed near the crate studying the looping clip. When Jarrell returned, moments later, Laurent was gone and the crate had been dragged 2 feet closer to the wall. There were no signs of a struggle and no debris on the floor. Security was called and a search was launched through every level of the building. They checked old blueprints and found that a small crawl space existed behind that wall, although records showed it had been sealed during renovations in the late 2000s. A remote camera was pushed inside during the search, but the crawl space ended in a collapsed section where cables hung like dead vines against concrete. Weeks later, the closet was officially sealed by the building manager. During that process, they found the small camera still recording, although its battery should have been empty long before that day. The final moments on the recovered footage showed the empty closet with the door slightly open. The cold air effect happened again because frost formed on the metal crate for several seconds before fading. No figure appeared on the clip, and no sound occurred except a soft tap that matched the earlier reports. The case remained open because no trace of Laurent turned up anywhere in the building or the surrounding lots. Some investigators believed he crawled into the sealed gap and became trapped, although the remote camera found no sign to support that. Others thought the earlier contractor in the clip might have accessed the area for reasons that were never logged. Those theories remained unproven because no further evidence surfaced. The building keeps the closet sealed, and new tenants use the hallway without knowing much about the incident. Maintenance staff still mention the odd patch of cold air near that door when the seasons shift, but they treat it as a minor quirk that does not affect their routines. The older technicians say the footage probably captured a forgotten repair crew, even if the records were too messy to confirm that. The quiet clip remains in a small archive box in the manager's office. It shows an ordinary room, an old crate, and a narrow gap that never leads anywhere clear. It holds a brief record of a moment when something felt off in a place meant for simple repairs. It leaves a quiet reminder that even a locked service closet can hold questions that never settle completely. What this abandoned rest stop revealed still haunts investigators. Highway crews still talk about the rest stop like it is some quiet bruise on the side of the old state road, the kind you notice only when the weather turns gray and the trees start leaning a little too close to the pavement. The building is gone now, replaced by a fenced patch of gravel. But the story stuck because of what happened to a surveyor named Kieran Holt. The case file is dusty, the statements are messy, and the investigators who worked the first week still say they never really settled on one clean explanation. They just know something was wrong there, long before anyone realized they should have shut the place down tighter. Kieran was not the dramatic type. He was the kind of guy who always double-checked distances, kept backup batteries in his truck, and made small handwritten notes even when the radio logs were enough. He handled hundreds of miles of rural roads for the planning office, and that route took him through long stretches of quiet land where the only sound came from power lines humming over empty fields. People who knew him said he actually liked the silence because it made the work feel straightforward. He just measured things, wrote things, fixed things, and went home. That morning, he left before sunrise because he wanted to finish early and beat a patch of oncoming rain. The abandoned rest stop sat along his first checkpoint, and even though it had been closed for years, he still stopped there sometimes to take signal readings. It gave him a clear view of the ridge and the highway bend. It was habit more than necessity, and he had done it so many times that no one thought twice when they looked at his assigned route later. The patrol video that eventually became the anchor of the whole timeline showed his truck pulling up to the cracked entrance. He gets out, checks the sky, and walks toward the old restroom building with his binder under one arm. That is the last clear image of him moving normally. Everything after that is fragments. Investigators learned that the first thing that caught his attention was a shoe print, one clear print in a layer of pale dust near the doorway. It had sharp edges, almost fresh. He took a picture of it because that is what he did whenever something looked off. He was not paranoid, just methodical. He probably thought someone slept inside the building during the night. It happens sometimes on remote highways. He wrote down the time, circled the note, and stepped into the entrance. The hallway was dark and carried a strange, muffled echo, like the walls were padded even though they were just old tile. He heard a scraping sound from deeper inside. Not metal dragging, not an animal. Something steady and slow, like someone shifting their foot across grit. He called out, waited, and heard nothing. The sound stopped like it had been listening. Kieran walked back to his truck to radio the office, but his voice broke apart in static. The dispatcher later told investigators that the call sounded like it was underwater and bouncing through a long metal tube. She heard only fragments: his name, a location code, and something that sounded like movement inside. He tried again, and the signal died. That alone was unusual because that section of highway always had clean coverage. The binder recovered from his truck showed his own version of events. He wrote hallway sound, not wind, and then another line about a broken window at the back of the building. Investigators confirmed the window had been shattered outward. That meant something inside forced its way out, even though the inside had been boarded months earlier. Two highway workers driving through the area about an hour after Kieran arrived reported seeing a person moving inside the hallway. They saw the silhouette through the broken boards on the far window. They assumed it was Kieran and did not stop. Later, they both said the figure walked strangely, almost testing the ground each time it stepped forward. When Kieran failed to check in by midday, patrol deputies were sent to find him. His truck was still idling. The driver door was open. His binder was on the passenger seat with a page ripped halfway down. His pack lay near the broken window. The last photo on his camera showed the hallway inside the building. At the far end of the frame, barely visible, stood a faint figure leaning against the corner. No one could tell if it was facing the camera or facing away. Inside, deputies found scrape marks on the floor, thin, curved, following the left wall all the way to a locked storage room. The door showed no signs of force, yet the dust around it was swept clean in a straight line, as if something moved in and out repeatedly. The key they used to open it had to be fetched from the district office because no one had unlocked that door since the rest stop closed. Inside the storage room, they found an old maintenance cart shoved off to one side. Beneath it lay a faded maintenance log from the late 2000s mentioning a ventilation repair and a crawl opening behind a panel. The panel had been sealed for decades. The log was not supposed to be there. When investigators removed the panel, the cavity behind it ran deeper than any blueprint suggested. The air that came from the gap was cold and carried a metallic smell that clung to clothing. A search camera was lowered inside. The footage showed concrete walls narrowing into a crooked tunnel barely large enough for a grown man to crawl through. 10 feet in, the camera light hit something reflective. A highway vest, not folded, not discarded, hanging there in a slack curve as if someone had leaned their back against the wall and slid downward. No body, no markings, no drag trails. Just a vest that did not match any active crew assignments. Temperature drops inside the cavity were recorded several times. Each time the camera paused, the air dipped sharply. No external vents, no crosswind, no clear cause. The readings were entered into evidence but never explained. Investigators expanded the search into the forest beyond the rest stop. Dogs were brought in, drones were flown. For 3 days, they found nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no cloth fibers. Only a small piece of metal near the far tree line, a fragment from a maintenance badge series retired decades earlier. Demolition crews arrived weeks later. They tore down the restroom building section by section. Workers reported strange acoustics in the hallway where Kieran took his final photo. Their tools sounded muted, as if wrapped in thick cloth. When they opened the wall near the crawl cavity, they found only a narrow, empty slot and a single metal hook drilled into the concrete. The hook had no purpose. The record showed no installation request. It faced inward, toward the cavity, like something had hung there long ago. In a thin layer of dust near the base of the cavity, they found a scrap of notebook paper. The edges were frayed as if torn in a hurry. The paper held 2 words in Kieran's handwriting: saw movement, no time, no location, no arrows, just those 2 words. Deputies later said the note bothered them more than anything else. He was careful, organized, and thorough. He always wrote full details. The only reason he would write something that vague was if he did not have time to write anything else. The rest stop was leveled to the foundation. The land was fenced off. The planning office rerouted all field checks away from the area. They said it was because the ground had become unstable, but the people who handled the paperwork knew that was just the clean explanation. Highway Patrol still reports occasional signal dips near the bend, only for a second, only when the morning fog is low. One deputy said he once saw a figure near the fence line in the gray light, standing too still to be a deer and too tall to be anyone from the service crew. When he turned the cruiser around, the figure was gone. The old case file sits in a drawer labeled Holt, Kieran. The binder, the camera, the scrap of paper, the vest, the temperature logs, the patrol video. None of it answers the basic question of where he went. Investigators who worked the early days still say the same thing when the topic comes up during late shifts. Whatever moved inside that building did not walk out through any of the exits. And whatever Kieran saw in that hallway moved first. The final recording from that flooded church basement. Late in the spring of 2012, a volunteer crew pulled a waterlogged recorder from a collapsed basement under an old rural church. Reports spread that the final audio on the device captured the last known moments of a maintenance worker who vanished during a sudden flood. Ronan Hale was 39 and worked as a part-time caretaker for that small church at the edge of a quiet farming town. He spent most days fixing loose boards or clearing brush behind the lot, and he usually kept to himself. On the afternoon this happened, he planned to finish an inventory list before joining his sister for dinner in a nearby township. He showed up shortly after noon and noticed muddy streaks along the stairs that dropped toward the lower storage rooms. The church sat near a narrow creek, and the building had a long history of minor flooding after heavy storms. Ronan figured it was another routine cleanup and carried a battery lamp down to check the drain lines. When he reached the landing, he heard a faint ticking, echoing from somewhere past the stacked folding chairs. He also saw a thin sheet of water drifting across the concrete toward the maintenance alcove. Witness statements later described him as calm, since he handled similar issues many times without trouble. Still, something about the slow, rhythmic sound bothered him. He placed his small recorder on a shelf near the stair base so he could replay any strange noises for the plumbing contractor. Records confirm he often did that when pipes groaned or pumps stalled. A neighbor recalled that Ronan believed strange sounds usually meant a stuck valve or trapped air inside old lines. Minutes later, the creek rose faster than predicted, and water began forcing itself beneath the rear foundation. According to archived weather logs, the storm upstream had dumped far more rain than expected, and the narrow channel behind the church could not clear fast enough. The basement started filling from the farthest corner first, leaving Ronan cut off near the central posts. He radioed a brief message to the grounds coordinator saying he needed to move a heavy storage bin away from the drain. Then the signal cut out without further updates. The coordinator attempted several calls, but only heard faint splashing on the other end. Emergency crews were dispatched, but could not enter the building safely until the current slowed. The rescued recorder revealed a clearer timeline. The audio began with Ronan muttering about the strange ticking that seemed louder than before. He walked toward the back alcove where tools were kept, and the lamp clinked lightly each time the cord brushed metal shelves. Investigators later compared the pattern to a leaking valve that steadily hit a rusted pipe, though the source was never fully confirmed. As water rushed in, Ronan tried to move toward the stairs, but slipped when the current swept across the floor. The recorder captured him steadying himself while commenting that the water felt warmer than expected. Experts noted that groundwater sometimes rose through fractured soil pockets, which could hold warmer runoff, so his remark aligned with natural conditions. Midway through the recording, he found a narrow beam of daylight pushing through a cracked board along the far wall. Some locals claimed the area once held a sealed passage to a storage pit used decades earlier. Building records showed an unfinished renovation during the early 1970s that left several sections partially reinforced. Ronan tapped the wall and called out, asking if anyone was upstairs. His voice carried oddly, reducing in clarity whenever the ticking sound surged. The audio suggested that something behind the wall shifted each time the floodwater reached a higher mark. Engineers explained that wooden beams often swell when soaked, creating sharp, popping echoes similar to the ones he described. At the 30-minute mark, he dragged a crate toward the rising water and tried smashing the weak panel to widen the opening. The recorder picked up heavy breaths, scraping wood, and the moment the board gave way. A rush of air shot through with a hollow tone that made investigators replay the segment multiple times. Behind the panel lay an older pump pit that had been sealed off for safety. Ronan climbed inside, believing it sat higher than the basement floor. Archival diagrams showed the chamber was once used for heating lines, though it had been disconnected long before. The space offered only a few inches of clearance from the ceiling, but Ronan seemed convinced it could buy some time. The recorder captured him trying to describe what he saw inside. He mentioned rows of iron hooks mounted on support beams and a narrow ledge carrying dusty jars. No records exist explaining why those hooks remained in a decommissioned space. A retired groundskeeper told investigators that the pit might have stored repair equipment during early construction, but could not recall exact details. Water rose into the chamber faster than Ronan expected. He climbed onto an overturned crate and kept speaking to the recorder while shining his lamp at the far corner. The ticking noise seemed louder than ever, echoing as if bouncing off several close surfaces rather than one. Audio analysts believed multiple metal components vibrated under sudden pressure, which could create overlapping pulses similar to a rapid knock. Near the end of the recording, his tone changed. He said he saw movement near the jars, describing a shifting ripple that matched the lamp beam. Researchers proposed the jars trapped pockets of air under their lids, creating bubbles as the temperature changed. The motion could have startled him, since dim light often distorts reflections on rising water. Moments later, the crate under him tipped, and he fell against the recorder shelf he had brought into the chamber. The splash nearly drowned the microphone, but it kept capturing faint sounds. He shouted toward the cracked entry, saying the current was pulling through the opening as if water drained toward a lower point. Engineers later found a small section of rotted flooring under the pit that had collapsed, allowing water to rush downward into a deeper cavity. The final clear segment recorded Ronan calling out that he could feel the floor shifting. Then there was a sharp crack, followed by a sudden roar as part of the lower structure gave way. The audio ended with a rush that matched water pouring through unstable timber. Rescue crews found no sign of him once the flood receded, and the cavity beneath the pit remained too unstable for deeper searches. Investigators concluded that he was likely swept into a collapsed subchannel formed by decades of erosion. The ticking sound remained the only unexplained detail, though most experts agreed it was probably a combination of pipes, swollen beams, and loose metal vibrating under pressure. The church was later reinforced, and the basement was sealed for safety. Some volunteers claimed they still heard faint rhythmic taps during heavy rain, though that was never verified. The recorder was stored with the case notes, serving as the only account of what happened beneath that flooded floor. In the years since, Ronan's family kept a quiet memorial near the creek trail where he liked to walk after work. They said they preferred believing he fought hard to find a way out during those final minutes. The recording remains a reminder of how quickly familiar places can change when hidden parts of old structures finally give out. The terrifying pattern behind these abandoned campsite calls. In late autumn of 2019, a string of abandoned campsite calls started showing up on a small county dispatcher log. Every call sounded like someone was trying to describe the same quiet forest sound before abruptly going silent. The pattern only became clear after a ranger reviewed the recordings weeks later. Kalen Drew was 37 and worked as a seasonal ranger who covered a stretch of woodland near an old reservoir. He spent most mornings checking trail markers or reminding campers to store food safely, and he usually finished his route by early afternoon. On the day he first heard about the calls, he had planned to photograph a ridge for a new map update. He stopped by the dispatch office before heading out and saw a printout listing 3 short, incomplete calls that all came from similar tower coordinates. Each call ended in under 30 seconds and contained the same low tone in the background. The dispatcher remembered the callers sounding unsure about what they were hearing, which caught Kalen's attention because the region rarely had unusual wildlife activity. He drove toward the reservoir and parked near a small access gate. Weather reports later noted a strong cold front moving toward the area that afternoon, which often caused strange echoes through narrow valleys. The air already felt heavy and carried a distant metallic note that he assumed came from shifting ice across the water. When he reached the ridge trail, he noticed a flattened tent tucked beside a cluster of pines. The soil around it showed no clear footprints, and the fabric was still clipped to its frame. Rangers who reviewed his photos said the campsite looked abandoned only hours before he arrived, with gear left in positions that suggested a fast exit without packing. Inside the tent, he found a small radio with its battery drained. The dial was set to a frequency used by hikers for quick contact with nearby groups. Witness statements later mentioned faint chatter from that channel the night before, though no confirmed calls were logged until the 3 incomplete ones. Kalen moved farther down the trail and checked another clearing where a second campsite usually stood. The fire ring remained warm enough to fog the air around it. He found 2 chairs facing the tree line as if someone had been listening closely moments before leaving. A plastic cup lay on its side next to a torn page from a pocket notebook. The page mentioned a distant pulsing sound that seemed to circle the campsite every hour. It also described a pattern that felt too steady to be natural wind through the branches. The writer noted that the pulses came in groups of 5 with a long pause after each set. For investigators, this matched the rhythm captured in the dispatcher recordings. Kalen radioed the office and asked whether any search notices had been filed for missing hikers. The office replied that no one had made any formal reports in recent days. He mentioned the pattern described in the notebook, and the dispatcher paused before, saying that the background tone in the calls also repeated in sets of 5. That confirmation changed the tone of his search. He decided to follow the faint footpath leading toward the reservoir where old service sheds once stood. According to archived land use files, the sheds stored equipment decades earlier, though most were dismantled after a flood damaged the road leading to them in the late 1980s. Only one partial frame remained near the waterline. As he approached the shed, he heard the same pulsing pattern drifting across the trees. Each pulse carried a hollow ring, followed by a soft, fading echo that sounded almost metallic. Engineers later suggested the noise could have been produced by a loose buoy chain hitting a submerged metal bracket as the water level rose and fell under shifting wind. The door of the shed was half open. Inside, he found another tent footprint pressed into the dirt, along with scattered cans and a small portable stove. A bright orange hiking pack sat against a beam with straps still buckled. According to later interviews, this pack belonged to a group who had passed the station 2 days earlier, though they were eventually found safe in another county after leaving early to avoid the cold front. The surprising detail came from a small recording device attached to the front pocket of the pack. Its red indicator was still blinking, suggesting it had made a short call before running out of power. Kalen played the final segment and heard the same pulsing sound, followed by a strained voice saying a single phrase. The voice said something was moving between the campsites in perfect rhythm with the pulses. He carried the device outside and tried matching the recorded pulses with the sound over the reservoir. The rhythm aligned almost perfectly. When the wind shifted, the pulses grew softer but remained evenly spaced. He noted that every time a pulse hit a louder point, the surrounding birds went silent. Biologists later confirmed that sudden pressure changes around water can startle local wildlife into brief, quiet spells. Kalen searched the shoreline for any sign of the missing hikers mentioned in the notebook. He found only a narrow trail in the reeds that ended near a cluster of driftwood. The mud showed small divots spaced evenly apart. Experts believed these came from someone running across wet ground while carrying a loaded pack. The stride pattern suggested urgency rather than a casual hike. He followed the trail until he reached a rocky ledge where the water carved a narrow inlet. There, he discovered a portable lantern resting on a flat stone with its light still flickering on a dying battery. Someone had placed it carefully, facing outward toward the water as if signaling for help. Kalen turned it off to preserve the battery and noticed fresh scratches on the stone beneath it. The scratches showed the same 5-count pattern seen in the notebook. Investigators believed the marks indicated someone trying to track each pulse while waiting for the next. This detail strengthened the idea that the hikers believed the sound represented something moving or shifting in response to each pulse. Kalen radioed the office again and described everything he found. The dispatcher admitted that the 3 abandoned calls also ended right after the 5th pulse in each cycle. This coordination unsettled Kalen enough that he chose to head back toward the first campsite before nightfall, hoping to find any detail he might have missed. On his way back, the pulses grew sharper as the wind calmed. He paused near a boulder and listened to the rhythm echo across the valley. He noticed that each pulse was followed by a faint rattling sound from deeper inside the trees. Later analysis suggested the rattling could have come from an old fence line partially buried under soil that shifted whenever the wind pushed water against the reservoir wall. When he reached the flattened tent, he found a new set of footprints crossing the earlier ones. These prints pointed toward the access road and appeared lighter, as if someone had walked slowly and carefully. Rangers concluded the hikers likely returned during the short window after Kalen left the site. They probably wanted to avoid the falling temperature and chose the closest route out. The final piece came later that week when audio technicians studied all recordings together. They discovered that the pulsing sound formed a pattern identical to a failing pressure valve inside a submerged outflow pipe near the reservoir dam. When water levels reached a certain point, the valve played a repeating tone that carried through the valley during temperature drops. The hikers likely misinterpreted the sound during the foggy evening when echoes can distort direction. Their calls ended abruptly because their devices struggled to keep signal strength in that valley. They also left the campsites quickly when the shifting pressure caused branches and loose metal to rattle in sync with the pulses. Kalen filed the full report and recommended additional signage near the reservoir trail, explaining that strange echoes may occur when water levels change suddenly. He also noted that no evidence suggested anyone was harmed or pursued by anything unusual during the events. In the years after the incident, the abandoned campsite calls became a quiet lesson for new rangers. They learned that patterns in remote places often come from the land itself, rather than from anything hidden within it. The recordings remain stored in the office as a reminder that fear can grow quickly when sounds repeat with perfect rhythm in a dark and unfamiliar forest. This forgotten photo wasn't meant for you. Reports about this photo surfaced after a retired volunteer mailed a small envelope to a regional archive during late summer. The image inside showed a dim roadside meadow with a shadowed figure standing near a broken fence. The envelope also held a note claiming the scene connected to an incident that never reached public attention. Lennox Har was 29 and worked as a field assistant for a small environmental survey group based near a rural valley. He spent most days collecting soil samples or checking wildlife cameras scattered across old service roads. His simple plan that afternoon involved retrieving a damaged camera before an incoming storm reached the ridge. He drove a narrow gravel route often used by hunters who needed quiet access to deeper trails. The air felt still and heavy as clouds pushed over the hills with slow, deliberate motion. He parked near a worn pullout because the last recorded coordinates for the broken camera placed it 200 yards beyond that point. The incident started when he found the camera half buried under fallen branches near a shallow ditch. A cracked lens cover suggested it had been struck by debris during a recent wind event. He removed the memory card and placed the camera in his pack because he planned to review the footage later at their office. Lennox began walking back toward his truck when he noticed a second trail of disturbed leaves leading into a small clearing. The path looked narrow and oddly straight, which conflicted with the random patterns that wind usually created. He followed it slowly since local rangers often mentioned that survey work required careful documentation of unexpected environmental changes. The trail ended at a clearing containing a collapsed metal sign hidden under vines and scattered bark. The faded letters once indicated a temporary rest area built during 1996 for road crews resurfacing the nearby highway. That rest stop had been dismantled after funding cuts left only foundations and broken fencing behind. His first complication appeared when he saw an old disposable camera lying beside the collapsed sign. It rested on a patch of dry grass that showed no prints or debris around it. The casing looked weathered, but the film compartment remained intact, which felt unusual for an item exposed to harsh seasons. He picked it up and lightly shook it, which produced a faint rattle suggesting partial film still inside. He placed it in his pack because their office kept an outdated film reader for educational projects. He planned to examine it later and mark its location in the survey log to maintain proper documentation. The second complication appeared as he prepared to leave the clearing. A soft, cracking sound rose from deeper inside the trees as if someone stepped on brittle branches. Lennox paused because he believed a person might be in distress or possibly hiding from the approaching storm. He called out a quick question asking if anyone needed help. No one responded, though. The air carried a brief shift in temperature that made him draw his jacket tighter across his chest. He started walking again and aimed to reach the truck before rainfall soaked the route and turned the ditch into a deeper channel. The forest remained silent, except for distant rumbling above the ridge. He reached the truck and began loading his equipment when he heard a faint metallic click near the tree line. The sound repeated twice and seemed to match the shutter of an older camera. He scanned the clearing but saw nothing except scattered branches and a few leaning posts that once supported instructional signs. Lennox drove back to the survey office and used their small utility room to review the damaged wildlife camera footage. Most clips showed common movement patterns created by deer and small mammals crossing the route. The final clip captured a person walking in the opposite direction of the expected trail during early dawn 2 days earlier. The person moved with a slow and uneven gait and carried what appeared to be a small rectangular object at chest height. The image clarity made it difficult to confirm if the object was a camera, though the posture suggested careful framing. Lennox paused the footage because the outline of the clearing gate appeared in the far corner of the frame. He retrieved the disposable camera from his pack and handed it to a senior technician named Corbin, who handled older equipment. Corbin used the film reader and recovered 8 frames, showing a sequence taken from almost the same angle as the collapse sign in the clearing. The final frame captured a figure standing near the broken fence with their face turned slightly away from the lens. The figure appeared in muted light, which suggested early morning or late afternoon conditions. A faint shape near the left edge of the frame resembled a folded jacket lying across the old sign. Corbin noted that the film quality indicated the shots were taken after 2010, even though the rest stop closed long before then. Lennox became uneasy after noticing the figure's posture matched the person seen in the wildlife video. Both showed a lean-forward stance and a slight tilt of the head. The rectangular object held by the person on the wildlife footage could match the disposable camera discovered near the collapsed sign. He contacted a retired ranger named Talwin, who previously assisted the survey group with map corrections. She recalled that a solo traveler went missing near that same ridge during early spring 2011. That traveler reportedly searched for abandoned roadside campsites that once held documented historical markers from older transportation routes. The traveler left behind a short note mentioning interest in forgotten structures and plans to photograph locations before seasonal storms erased remaining markers. The final known lead placed the traveler near an old turnout connected to the same service road used by Lennox. Talwin explained that search crews relied on those clues but never found evidence beyond scattered gear. Lennox studied the disposable camera images again and noticed the shadow of an upright post near the figure's left side. The wildlife footage revealed that same post leaning at a matching angle in the clearing. This connection implied the person in the photos stood exactly where Lennox found the camera during his late afternoon survey. The twist emerged when Corbin revealed a final partial strip from the processed film. The strip contained one fragmented image that captured the clearing from a vantage point behind the broken fence. The perspective showed the photographer standing near the metal sign with their back turned toward the viewer. The photographer wore the same jacket seen on the ground in the earlier frame. Lennox returned to the site 2 days later because he wanted to compare the angles with the remaining markers. The ground around the collapsed sign showed faint indentations consistent with footprints older than a week but newer than a full season. Thin grass leaned toward the ditch as if someone had stood in the area while shifting weight repeatedly. He moved toward the broken fence and found a small rusted clasp lodged between 2 boards. The clasp matched a style used for travel pouches sold widely during early 2000 years. He placed it in a sample bag and took detailed notes to match its position accurately. He also found a torn corner of paper trapped under a rock near the ditch. The paper held part of a handwritten message referencing a plan to document a final viewpoint before leaving the region. The ink showed fading consistent with long exposure, yet the paper itself remained relatively intact. Experts later suggested it drifted under debris layers and resurfaced only when strong winds pushed through the clearing during recent storms. Lennox followed the ditch for 40 yards until he reached a cluster of stones arranged awkwardly in a narrow line. The stones looked intentionally placed because they formed a gentle curve pointing toward a shallow rise behind the trees. He climbed the rise and found a flat patch of ground offering a clear view of the entire clearing. He stood there silently as faint wind pushed shadows across the broken fence. From that point, he could replicate the perspective in the fragmented film strip that showed the photographer from behind. This meant the photo captured someone positioned at the rise while the traveler stood near the sign preparing another shot. The most plausible explanation suggested that the traveler photographed the clearing repeatedly while unaware that someone moved behind them at the rise. That person may have used the wildlife path later identified in the camera footage. The storm that approached during the traveler's final day probably scattered additional traces that might have indicated a struggle or sudden retreat. Local volunteers believe the traveler attempted to return to the main road through the meadow, but became disoriented as rainfall obscured the route. The jacket in the image might have been removed during brief rest or while repositioning equipment. The disposable camera possibly fell during the storm and remained protected under thick vegetation for many years. Lennox provided his findings to regional authorities, who updated the old missing person file with the new evidence. They identified the figure in the wildlife footage as likely matching height estimates from the 2011 case. The possibility of a second person at the scene remained unresolved, though rangers suggested a passing hiker might have crossed paths unintentionally. The forgotten photo carried eerie weight because it revealed the photographer moments before an undocumented event shifted the path of their final hours. The image never showed clear danger, yet implied a presence that remained unaccounted for in any official record. Investigators believed the most reasonable conclusion involved miscommunication and lost orientation rather than malicious intent. Lennox visited the clearing once more during early autumn because the survey group needed updated vegetation samples. He said the place felt calmer, yet still held a quiet sense of unfinished memory. The broken fence leaned further, and the collapsed sign sank deeper into the soil, though the meadow continued growing around them with steady resilience. In the end, the forgotten photo reminded everyone that rural trails often hold small, disconnected moments preserved by chance. A misplaced camera or silent witness can carry fragments of a larger story that fades as seasons shift across old routes. The truth behind the traveler's final steps may never be fully known, though the evidence now fits a clearer pattern that respects both logic and the limits of memory. A night guard who returned after vanishing years ago. In archived reports kept by a regional security contractor, supervisors noted an unusual case involving a night guard who vanished during one shift. Those same archived notes later recorded his unexpected return many years after that first unexplained disappearance. The story centers on Marlon Givens, a 38-year-old security guard working occasional contracts in a sparse industrial district outside a small desert town. He had taken a temporary assignment at a storage yard that kept older medical equipment and assorted surplus materials locked behind tall fences. He expected a quiet night and hoped to finish the shift without trouble. He planned to log routine patrols, drink his thermos coffee, then head home before sunrise. The incident began when he noticed a flicker of light near a row of rusted supply sheds about an hour after midnight. He thought it might be a loose fixture triggered by the wind, although the air felt still inside the yard. He walked toward the sheds with a steady pace while radioing dispatch to confirm no technicians were scheduled to visit overnight. The flicker repeated, and Marlon heard a sharp tapping sound echo through the quiet yard. He paused near the first shed and pressed his hand against the metal door, which felt strangely warm against the cool desert air. He reported hearing faint movement inside, which made no sense because the contents were supposed to be packed and sealed for months. According to later witness summaries, the yard manager arrived early next morning and found Marlon's patrol notes abandoned on a bench near the chain-link gate. His radio lay beside the notebook with the transmit button jammed downward. There were no clear footprints leading out of the yard, only one faint trail that ended near the same shed Marlon had investigated hours earlier. Authorities searched the grounds for several days using dogs and volunteers drawn from nearby businesses. Archived dispatch recordings captured Marlin's final transmission. He said the shed door felt unlocked even though he remembered spinning the latch earlier. He said something inside the shed kept tapping on the metal wall as if following his movements from the outside. Investigators later reviewed the door hardware and found no sign of forced entry or tampering. Marlin's family filed missing person reports and continued pressing for updates during the following years. Every lead turned uncertain once investigators checked physical evidence. A traveler claimed he had seen someone resembling Marlin near a border town in 2008, but the description stayed vague. Another tip in 2012 involved security camera footage from a bus station where a man with a similar build boarded a westbound route. The man kept his face turned from the camera, and analysts could not confirm the match. 17 years passed before anything changed. A new manager for the same storage yard took over operations and hired a small crew to clear dust and replace older inventory tags. One crew member, named Tessa Brigham, found a narrow maintenance corridor behind a row of stacked machinery crates. The corridor had once been used for wiring checks, although updated systems had made it unnecessary. The entrance had been partially covered by a sliding panel warped from heat and age. Tessa called the manager because she saw a folded jacket tucked against the back wall. Inside the jacket pocket, she found an employee ID card bearing Marlin's name and an outdated photo. The fabric looked almost pristine, which surprised her because the corridor showed signs of long-term neglect. Dust clung to exposed wires, and small fragments of insulation lay scattered across the floor. The jacket seemed placed recently rather than left untouched for years. The manager contacted local authorities who reviewed historical records from the yard. They measured the space and documented the temperature difference inside the narrow corridor compared with the surrounding building. The air felt noticeably cooler inside the corridor, even though the desert heat pressed heavily against the outer walls. Investigators found no living space or hidden compartment, only a cramped passage that appeared unused since before Marlin vanished. 2 weeks after the jacket discovery, a driver passing the front entrance claimed she saw a figure limping along the outer fence line just after sunset. She described a tall man wearing a faded uniform shirt with an older-style security patch stitched onto the sleeve. She slowed her car and watched the figure stop at the gate, then turned sharply toward the side road before disappearing behind a cluster of abandoned trailers. Deputies searched that area before finding fresh footprints beside a short length of broken fence. The prints matched the approximate boot size listed on Marlin's original employment form. A pair of partial handprints smudged the dusty trailer door, yet the angle suggested someone had steadied themselves carefully instead of forcing the door. 3 nights later, a clerk at a gas station about 2 miles away reported a strange encounter with someone she believed might be Marlin. She said the man stepped inside wearing a sun-bleached jacket and carrying a small spiral notebook. His face appeared drawn and tired, and he avoided eye contact except when asking quietly if the station still hired overnight help. The clerk stepped away briefly to notify her supervisor, then returned to find the man gone. Security video confirmed the visit, but provided only a grainy view of the figure as he exited the building. Investigators pieced together a timeline using those sightings, although several points conflicted with environmental data. A thermal camera mounted on the yard perimeter recorded a single figure approaching the sheds 4 hours before the gas station visit. The stride length matched the figure seen by the driver earlier that week. That meant someone moved between the fenced property and the nearby road multiple times within the same night, yet no patrol officers saw anyone on routine checks. Authorities distributed updated informational sheets to local hospitals and shelters. Staff at a small emergency clinic contacted them 2 days later. A man had walked in during a quiet afternoon, asking to speak privately with whoever handled security matters. He said his name was Marlin Givens and that he wanted to return something he had taken from his old job. He reached inside his jacket and placed a folded patrol log on the counter, then asked if he could sit near the entrance because noise bothered him. Clinic workers described his voice as strained and uneven. He told them he remembered stepping into the shed and hearing someone whisper behind him, even though he saw no one there. He said the light inside the shed turned blindingly white and everything around him felt hollow, like the air had drained out of the room. He insisted he had not run away or abandoned his post. He claimed he simply walked back toward the exit and found the yard empty when he emerged. A responding deputy said Marlin seemed confused about the year, although he recognized the town name and his original employer. His clothing showed little wear despite his long absence. The notebook he carried had several pages filled with odd time entries that did not match any known calendar format. Each entry tracked moments by counting shadow movements or changes in distant sounds rather than standard clock hours. When investigators asked where he had been, Marlin paused for a long moment, then said he had walked along the sheds until the ground changed. He said it felt like he crossed through a place built from repeating patterns of metal and dust. He claimed he followed a path that returned him to the yard entrance where he saw new padlocks on the gate. He appeared genuinely unaware that many years had passed since he first vanished. Medical staff examined him and found no serious injuries. His vital signs remained steady, yet his body temperature ran slightly cooler than expected for someone standing in a warm environment. Specialists reviewed his story and proposed several theories, including psychological shock and memory displacement caused by extreme stress. They suggested he might have suffered an episode that blurred his perception of time. They could not explain why his clothing showed minimal aging or why his ID card looked recently cleaned. Authorities escorted Marlin to a quiet facility for further evaluation. He answered questions politely, but avoided any mention of the narrow corridor where his jacket had been discovered. When shown a photograph of the corridor, he lowered his gaze and said he recognized the texture of the wall, but did not understand how his jacket reached that place. He said he felt overwhelmed by certain mechanical noises in the building and asked if he could wait outside until the interview ended. Investigators continued reviewing logs from the night he vanished. They found a short audio clip recorded by a faulty perimeter microphone that had remained stored on an old server. The clip captured a hollow metallic ringing, followed by a voice resembling Marlin's. He said someone kept calling his name softly from inside the shed, even though he knew he was alone. Analysts could not determine whether the voice belonged to a person or a distorted echo created by shifting metal. Marlin eventually returned to stay with distant relatives in another state after the facility cleared his release. Officials stopped their active investigation and recorded the case as a missing person who reappeared under unusual circumstances. They documented every sighting, every recording, and every artifact, but found no clear explanation for the long gap in Marlin's life. Residents near the storage yard still talk quietly about the sheds. Some say the flickering light has returned many times, although the equipment inside has not changed in years. Others claim they have seen a tall figure walking between the crates long after the yard closes for the night. Each story remains unverified, but the security company moved patrol routes away from the sheds as a precaution. The case leaves more questions than answers. Marlin lives quietly and avoids discussing the event except when officials request brief statements. He says he feels grateful for ordinary routines and tries not to dwell on the missing years. He still believes he only stepped into the shed for a short moment and returned to find the world changed around him. No clue in the case? Check the basement steps. Archived county summaries about a stalled investigation often mention one note written in shaky handwriting by a frustrated detective. The note said, investigators found no lead strong enough to explain a disappearance until someone suggested checking the basement steps. The account follows Rowan Latchford, a 34-year-old property inspector assigned to evaluate older rental homes in a quiet valley town. Rowan spent that week finishing reports for a company that kept tight schedules, and he hoped the final inspection would be quick. The house sat on a narrow road lined with cottonwoods, and he expected nothing unusual inside the small structure beyond routine wear and dust events. Trouble began when he entered the house near midday and noticed an open binder on the kitchen counter. The binder belonged to the previous tenant, according to later interviews, and held receipts mixed with scattered pages of personal notes. Rowan reached for the binder and heard a faint scrape from somewhere under the floor. He thought it might be a loose pipe, although the sound repeated with a steady pattern that did not resemble typical settling noises. He walked through the living room and found a trap door leading to a basement lit by a single bulb. He descended halfway before stopping because the air felt colder than expected in a dry climate. According to the official interview he filed that afternoon, Rowan stepped onto the second wooden stair and felt a gentle vibration run through the structure. He called out to check whether anyone stayed below. Investigators later confirmed the basement held only boxes, an old dryer, and a short tool bench. Yet Rowan insisted he heard someone move through the darkness as if sliding an object across concrete. He backed away carefully and climbed to the kitchen, where he took several photos for his report. While doing so, he noticed a narrow gap beside the fridge that revealed part of the basement wall. The gap looked new, almost as if someone had cut into the plaster recently. That evening, Rowan delivered his standard paperwork to the office, and the supervisor added the file to a growing set of documents about the property. 3 people had rented the house during the decade before Rowan visited, and each left after short stays. One renter never picked up her final deposit refund. Records noted she vanished during late summer of 2007 after calling a friend about strange noises under the floor. A local deputy remembered limited details about that older case because the missing renter left few personal items. The deputy said they searched the basement carefully and found nothing suspicious beyond the older wiring and a slight draft behind the tool bench. According to dispatch logs, no further action was taken and the case grew cold within months. After Rowan mentioned the vibration on the second stair, the supervisor contacted county officials to reassess the house. A small team visited the property during a cool morning and measured floor temperatures. They found the steps leading into the basement remained colder than the surrounding air by several degrees. They traced the draft to a narrow channel in the wall, although they struggled to find an accessible entry point. A specialist reviewing older structural plans discovered an unusual mark in the blueprint for the original foundation. The mark indicated a void that did not match the visible basement layout. The team returned to the house and placed a sensor near the second stair. The device recorded faint rhythmic impacts similar to tapping on hollow material. The pattern repeated at irregular intervals and grew louder when weight pressed on the step above. A neighbor living across the road reported that the house had a strange reputation long before Rowan's visit. She claimed she often heard soft metallic knocks coming from its open windows at night. She also recalled seeing a tenant in 2011 leave the house carrying a heavy bag while glancing repeatedly toward the basement door. He drove away before anyone spoke with him again. Investigators reviewed audio clips captured by the sensor. One clip contained a muffled voice that sounded like a whisper rising through the floor. The words stayed unclear, yet the tone suggested someone calling for assistance. They compared the voice with emergency calls from 2007 made by the renter who disappeared. Some vowel shapes matched, although experts could not guarantee a perfect link. Authorities returned to the house for a deeper inspection. They removed the boards covering the second stair and found a thin metal sheet fixed between the wood planks. Someone had cut a small notch along the sheet edge, which connected to the narrow channel inside the wall. A slight draft rose through the notch as if air flowed from a lower space that had not been mapped. They shifted equipment and followed the channel downward with a fiber camera. The footage showed a cramped void between concrete barriers filled with tangled wires, scraps of fabric, and a scattering of small objects. One object looked like a bracelet that matched a description listed in the old missing person report. Investigators enlarged the image and confirmed its distinctive pattern from archived photos provided by the renter's family. Workers pried open a section of the wall and expanded the narrow channel enough for entry. They climbed inside and found a small step cut into the concrete, leading deeper than expected. The air remained chilly even though the day felt warm outside. The step descended into a pocket shaped like an unfinished room. At the center, they discovered a collapsed wooden frame and 2 crates holding personal items, including a journal. The journal dated back to 1999 and belonged to an earlier tenant who left the property without notice. The entries grew increasingly erratic and described nightly tapping under the stairs. He wrote that the sound followed him through the house as if tracing his footsteps. His final entry stated he planned to investigate the second stair because he felt certain a cavity existed beneath it. Forensic teams examined the cavity thoroughly and found soil marks that suggested someone had crawled through the space multiple times. They also found clothing fibers matching samples from the tenant who vanished in 2007. However, they found no conclusive physical evidence at the deeper end of the cavity. The space narrowed until only loose dirt filled the final few feet. Rowan learned about the discovery from the supervisor, who praised his attention to detail. He struggled to sleep for several nights after hearing how closely the clues linked to the missing cases. He returned to the property only once during the follow-up inspection and avoided stepping on the stairs. He said the air still felt heavier near the second step, even with investigators present. Officials eventually released updated statements explaining that structural faults created a hidden path that may have trapped someone inside the cavity years earlier. They admitted uncertainty about the full timeline because evidence remained fragmented. They documented every item found in the void and closed access permanently to prevent future incidents. Neighbors continue sharing quiet theories about the lingering sounds. Some claim new tenants reported faint taps during late hours even after the cavity was sealed. Others believe the vibrations were caused by shifting soil and older pipes reacting to temperature changes. None of those theories explain the whispered voice caught on the sensor or the matching bracelet found below the steps. Rowan still works as an inspector and avoids discussing the case with coworkers. He says the lesson stayed simple. When a property offers no obvious clue, it helps to check the places overlooked for decades. He adds that he remembers the cold air rising through the notch in the stair and hopes no one else hears movement in that space again. This coastal church basement is a hidden trap. Investigators who reviewed an old coastal safety report often mention one overlooked line about a basement beneath a small church. The report warned that the basement layout did not match any registered plans, which suggested a hidden space that few locals knew existed. The story follows Leda Corvan, a 36-year-old maintenance contractor hired to check storm damage along a quiet shoreline district. She worked for a regional service crew that handled repairs for aging buildings near the harbor, and she arrived expecting a simple survey. Her final task involved inspecting a weathered church built during the early 1920s, and she hoped to finish before the tide winds grew strong. Leda walked through the main hall while noting cracks along the plaster and water stains creeping down the stained glass frames. She found the air noticeably colder near the rear doorway, and she marked it as a possible ventilation issue. She planned to measure the heating ducts, then return to her truck before reporting her findings. Trouble began when she stepped into a narrow corridor that led toward the basement. She heard a faint rhythm rising from below, and the sound resembled someone dragging a thin object across stone. She called out to check whether the pastor remained in the building, yet the hall stayed quiet. She decided to investigate carefully because her contract required full inspection of foundation areas. According to her later written statement, Leda descended the first set of stairs and reached a landing paved with old bricks. She noticed a light fixture that flickered weakly, and each flicker seemed timed with the dragging sound rising through the floor. She tested the bulb and realized the wires had been cut long ago. The faint light came from a source deeper inside the basement. The official building file showed only one basement room used for storage. Yet Leda found a second doorway that did not appear in the plans. She pushed it open gently and found another staircase built from uneven stone, and cold air drifted upward in slow pulses. She switched on her small inspection lamp and stepped downward until she reached an arched chamber lined with damp walls. The chamber held several wooden pews stacked against one side, along with a wooden crate that had been pried open recently. Inside the crate, she saw pages from a handwritten ledger bound with twine. The pages described attempts to reinforce the church foundation during 1954 using volunteers rather than licensed workers. The entries grew strange as they continued because they mentioned hearing voices from a deeper level beneath the stone floor. Leda photographed the crate and the ledger pages before noticing a narrow passage cut behind a row of broken pews. The passage sloped downward and ended at another set of steps that curved sharply to the right. The dragging sound echoed through the curve, and each vibration felt stronger than before. Leda radioed her supervisor to report a possible structural hazard, then moved far enough into the passage to gather more details. A retired caretaker who lived nearby later told investigators that the basement once extended toward an older storm drain tunnel. He said past staff members occasionally heard footsteps rising through the stone, but they dismissed the sounds as pressure shifts caused by high tides. He also recalled that one volunteer worker disappeared during the 1950s after entering the basement to repair a collapsed beam. Lita continued recording her inspection, and the audio captured sudden impacts on the walls surrounding the lower steps. She described the impacts as heavy strikes that repeated in slow sequences, then paused without warning. She noticed the stone seemed recently polished in certain areas, even though the rest of the basement carried layers of dust. She marked these polished patches as unusual points for later examination. Officials reviewed Lita's pictures and found concealed hinge marks beneath the dust along the side of the step curve. The marks indicated a hidden panel that once opened into another space, sealed sometime after 1973, when new building permits updated the church blueprint. That sealed space matched no registered design and had no documented purpose in county files. A local volunteer group joined investigators to help remove debris from the passage. They cleared the curve and found an iron gate wedged shut by fallen stones. When they lifted the stones, the dragging sound started again, now louder and more deliberate. The group paused to listen, and the sound seemed to circle the chamber below, as if someone traced the perimeter in measured steps. They forced the gate open with careful pressure. The interior revealed a second chamber shaped like a half-dome, with water pooled along its edges. The air felt colder than expected for a coastal underground room. Near the center lay a sunken depression filled with old ropes, stained cloth, and a metal toolbox. The toolbox held wrenches and nails coated with salt from decades of exposure. The dragging sound returned when one volunteer stepped near the depression. It echoed beneath their feet and shifted toward the steps, which startled the group. Leda suggested placing a sensor in the depression to track vibrations. The sensor immediately detected movement in a cavity below the chamber floor. The movement followed a steady rhythm similar to someone pacing in a cramped space. Authorities paused the inspection and brought structural engineers to map the cavity. Using ground imaging tools, they identified a hidden rectangular room directly under the depression. The room measured only a few feet tall and had one narrow exit leading into a smaller vertical shaft. Engineers believed the shaft once connected to a storm drain network abandoned during the early 1960s. While examining the depression, a volunteer found a rusted key partially buried under the ropes. The key fit a small lockbox stored inside the church office. The pastor granted permission to open the box, and inside, investigators found several notes written by the same volunteer who vanished in 1954. The notes described hearing someone calling from below the basement stairs during late evenings. The final note warned that the steps felt strange each time he stood on them, as if a hollow space reacted to his weight. The team returned to the chamber and removed a section of stone near the depression. They uncovered the top of the hidden room beneath, and inside, they found fragments of clothing, bits of rope, and a metal tag bearing the vanished worker. What investigators pulled from that lake tunnel? A forgotten service tunnel sat beneath a quiet mountain lake for nearly 40 years, sealed behind rusted grates that no one bothered to maintain. Rangers believed the old structure had collapsed long ago, and most locals barely remembered why it existed in the first place. That changed after a dry summer lowered the waterline and exposed the entrance again. What investigators pulled from that lake tunnel forced them to reopen a case they once treated as little more than a strange disappearance. Maren Halcombe was a 35-year-old trail engineer who specialized in documenting aging infrastructure around lakes and reservoirs. She spent most days hiking between work sites with a heavy pack full of radios and mapping tools. On a warm morning in late August, she drove to Alder Lake, a small body of water known for its calm surface and thick pine ridges. Her assignment was routine: inspect erosion along the northern bank, verify the safety of old retaining walls, then return before dusk. She clocked in at the ranger station, joked with the staff about the heat, and signed out a small aluminum boat to reach the inspection markers. Maren motored out at noon. She radioed a quick message saying she would check the North Cove before continuing toward the deeper water near the dam. Her voice sounded steady and relaxed. A pair of kayakers saw her near the center of the lake an hour later, drifting slowly while writing notes on her clipboard. They waved and she waved back. Nothing looked unusual. When Marin failed to return the boat by late afternoon, rangers launched a search. They found the aluminum boat drifting near the North Cove with the motor idling on low power. Her tools remained inside the hull, and her clipboard lay open with a half-written line about sediment patterns. The lake was calm, and there were no signs of struggle. Divers searched for 2 days but found nothing. The case stalled until the waterline dropped the following summer. A drought revealed the top edge of a wide concrete arch near the North Cove, about 20 feet from the shoreline. Rangers recognized it from an old blueprint stored in county archives. Decades earlier, engineers had built a service tunnel to move equipment between two sides of the lake during dam construction. When the project ended, the tunnel was sealed. Over time, rising water hid the entrance beneath several feet of lake water. Because Marin had been working near that exact cove, investigators decided to examine the structure. Divers cleared silt from the opening and found the old grate hanging loose from a corroded hinge. Behind it stretched a long tunnel filled with cold, still water. Visibility inside was poor, but divers noticed something unusual about 10 yards in. The tunnel floor was coated in sediment except for a narrow path where the mud had been disturbed recently. When they reached the end of the tunnel, divers surfaced into a pitch-dark chamber once used for equipment storage. The air felt stale but breathable. Flashlights revealed a scattering of rusted tools, collapsed beams, and an old workbench. Near the back wall stood a metal locker on its side. The door hung open, and inside lay a waterproof field pouch containing several items. One was a laminated ID badge belonging to Marin Halcombe. The pouch also held a small audio recorder. Its casing was cracked, and the switch had rusted in place. Technicians dried the device carefully, recovered the microcard, and played its single surviving file. Much of the audio was muffled water damage, but a few sentences remained intact. Marin sounded slightly winded. She mentioned finding an opening along the bank where the water line had dropped. She said she saw light glinting behind the grate and thought someone had left equipment inside by mistake. Her last clear words were that she heard something move deeper in the tunnel, followed by a short metallic scrape. The recording cut out abruptly. Investigators returned to the chamber and examined drag marks along the floor. The marks suggested someone or something had been pulled across the concrete toward a narrow side passage that did not appear on the original blueprints. That passage led to a collapsed section where jagged rebar jutted from broken slabs. In that corner, divers found fragments of a torn work glove identical to the ones Marin had checked out that morning. A deeper search uncovered something else. Hidden beneath a fallen beam was a rolled canvas bundle containing several notebooks wrapped in plastic. The notes belonged to a maintenance worker named Heron Colt, who had vanished from a nearby work camp in the late 1980s. His disappearance had been treated as a likely accident after a storm flooded the area. The notebooks told a different story. Heron wrote that he heard movement in the tunnel long after the construction crews had closed it. He mentioned seeing a lantern glow that vanished the moment he approached. His final entry read that he believed someone had been living inside the access chambers after they were sealed. Locals recalled rumors from that time about a man dismissed from the work camp after several confrontations. Witnesses reported seeing him fishing near the North Cove late at night and wandering into restricted areas. Nothing linked him formally to Heron's disappearance, and the matter faded as the lake rose and sealed the tunnel for good. Now, investigators had two vanished people, decades apart, tied to the same underwater structure. During a final sweep, divers found something wedged behind a rusted maintenance cabinet. It was a length of nylon rope, frayed at one end and tied at the other with a crude loop. The rope had been jammed deep between the cabinet and the wall, as if intentionally hidden. Tests showed it had been submerged only a short time. Nearby, on a scraped section of concrete, technicians lifted a partial boot print inconsistent with Marin's or the diver's equipment. The pattern matched older logging boots sold regionally in the early 2000s. In the weeks that followed, investigators pieced together a theory. Someone familiar with the old structure had been accessing the tunnel during periods of low water for years. They could have used the storage chamber as a shelter, reachable only when the lake receded. Heron's notes suggested this individual may have been using the tunnel since the construction era. The drag marks and rope indicated the person used the side passage regularly, possibly as an escape route when water levels rose. Marin likely entered out of curiosity, unaware that the tunnel still had a living occupant. No trace of that occupant was found. Not in the chamber, not in the woods surrounding the lake. Rangers increased patrols, and the county sealed the entrance with reinforced concrete. Boaters still avoid the North Cove, and longtime residents say the lake feels different now, quieter in a way that makes people stay close to shore. What investigators pulled from that lake tunnel offered no final answers, only the remnants of two lives interrupted decades apart. The items sit in climate-controlled storage boxes in the county evidence room. Marin's clipboard rests beside Heron's notebooks. Both point toward the same forgotten place beneath the lake, where darkness, stale air, and unexplained movement lived long after the surface world forgot the tunnel even existed. Why this forest bridge terrified every hiker. A narrow forest bridge became the center of an investigation after hikers reported the same strange detail that appeared again and again over nearly a decade. That bridge stood deep inside a protected woodland reserve, and although thousands of people passed it during daylight, only a handful crossed it near dusk. Their accounts drove rangers to review old logs, archived calls, and a long-neglected report that revealed why so many felt uneasy near that span. Elon Mercer was a 31-year-old trail cartographer hired to document erosion along older footpaths. His job required long hikes with a pack full of measuring tools, and he often worked alone because his schedule changed constantly. One afternoon in early fall, he planned a simple route that would take him over a ridge, down into a fern-covered valley, then across the narrow footbridge locals called Pine Crossing. He left the ranger station just after noon, logged his coordinates, and told the desk attendant he expected to return before sunset. He moved quickly for the first few miles. The air felt crisp, the forest quiet, and the trail looked freshly cleared. By mid-afternoon, he reached the ridge and began his descent toward the bridge. At that point, he radioed a short update saying the trail conditions seemed stable. His tone sounded normal. Nothing suggested concern. Nearby hikers later said they saw him pass with an easy stride, and he nodded politely before heading farther down the trail. Elon did not return that evening. The desk attendant called him at 7, then called again 30 minutes later. No response came through the radio, and his phone went straight to voicemail. Rangers hiked out with flashlights and checked the ridgeline first. They found nothing until they reached the bridge where Elon's pack sat propped against the railing. His tools were inside, neatly arranged. The pack showed no damage, and his notes appeared undisturbed. The only unusual detail was a thin coating of soil on the bridge boards, as if someone had crossed moments earlier. Search teams swept both sides of the valley for 2 days. Cadaver dogs tracked faint scent trails along the waterline, but lost the trail near a cluster of boulders. Investigators found no sign of struggle and no footprints other than a partial print near the bridge that did not match Elon's boots. The absence of evidence strengthened the feeling that he had been led away rather than forced. The case stalled when no additional clues surfaced. The turning point arrived 3 years later when a visiting hiker named Tessa Grange reported hearing footsteps behind her as she crossed the same bridge. She turned twice but saw no one. The forest felt still, and she described a sudden sensation of someone standing close to her left shoulder. She walked faster and reached the opposite bank without looking back again. When she returned to the ranger station, she filed a quick statement and mentioned a detail that startled the staff. She said she heard a low metallic click near the end of the bridge. That matched a sound noted in Elon's original report logs from earlier that year. Rangers reviewed archived incident files and discovered several scattered entries that all described the same feature. Hikers said the boards near the center of the bridge creaked in a pattern that suggested weight distributed unevenly. A few noted a shadow that lingered longer than their own. One hiker claimed she heard someone whisper her name even though she had not passed anyone for nearly an hour. None of these reports were strong enough to justify investigation until the pattern became clear. When investigators revisited Pine Crossing, they observed the structure's condition closely. The bridge spanned a narrow ravine with a shallow stream beneath it. Thick moss covered the rocks, and the air carried a mild echo. The railing stood weathered but stable. The boards near the center did creak, but not consistently. What caught their attention were faint tool marks beneath the central platform. These marks suggested someone had removed boards in the past and replaced them imperfectly. The pattern of the marks aligned with someone using the underside of the bridge as a temporary hiding place. Further inspection revealed a narrow ledge accessible from the ravine wall. The ledge sat just wide enough for a person to stand or crouch. Rangers believed someone could reach the underside of the bridge from that spot and climb onto the lower support beams. A worn patch of bark on a nearby tree indicated that someone had grabbed hold repeatedly. Soil samples collected from the underside matched soil from a remote trail spur that did not appear on public maps. That spur led toward an old forestry shed abandoned decades earlier. Investigators hiked to the shed and found a rusted lock on the door. The lock hung broken, and the interior looked dusty yet disturbed. A single lantern sat on a shelf beside a small notebook containing a few pages of rough writing. The notes described frustration about hikers who crossed Pine Crossing after dark. One line read that footsteps carried clearly across the bridge, and that the writer needed the sound to confirm timing. Another line mentioned watching from the ravine ledge and waiting for the right person who moved alone. The writing did not include a name or date, but the paper quality suggested it had been left around the time Elon disappeared. Inside a nearby cabinet, investigators found an older model trail counter. The device recorded motion along a narrow path and stored basic timestamps. When technicians accessed the memory, they found several entries showing activity near the ravine at irregular intervals. One timestamp aligned closely with the day Elon vanished. Another aligned with the day Tessa heard footsteps behind her. The counter logs suggested someone used the hidden spur trail regularly until roughly a year before the device was discovered. Rangers interviewed longtime residents living near the forest boundary. One elderly man recalled seeing a figure carrying a lantern near the ravine 10 years earlier. He assumed it was a surveyor until he noticed the figure walking directly beneath the bridge. A former fire crew volunteer remembered that the old forestry shed was once used as a temporary lookout post during wildfires. He said that access to the ravine ledge had been mentioned in old training manuals, though most newer staff never learned about it. These statements gave investigators a clearer understanding of how someone could watch hikers unnoticed for years. The most compelling clue emerged when technicians enhanced an older trail camera photo taken from a ridge overlooking Pine Crossing. The image showed a small silhouette moving under the bridge around the time Elon went missing. The resolution was poor, but the posture indicated a person climbing up or down the support beams. Investigators compared the outline to images of the ravine ledge and concluded that the silhouette matched the rough height and shape of a human figure navigating the hidden route. Piecing together the evidence, investigators believed someone used the underside of the bridge to observe or intercept hikers who traveled alone near dusk. They theorized that Elon encountered the person while documenting erosion along the ravine wall. His pack being left neatly suggested he placed it down willingly, perhaps because he heard someone call to him from below or behind. The partial footprint near the bridge likely belonged to the person who used the hidden route to approach him. The soil on the boards supported this idea because it matched the path leading to the old shed. The findings did not solve every part of the case, yet they offered the clearest explanation for why Pine Crossing felt unsettling to so many. The idea that someone had waited below the bridge, listening for footsteps and watching silhouettes, was enough to unsettle even experienced hikers. Rangers reinforced the structure shortly after the investigation and sealed access to the ravine ledge. They also closed the old spur trail and removed remaining debris from the forestry shed. Today, Pine Crossing looks like any other narrow forest bridge, though those who know its history still cross it quickly. They say the boards hold echoes from the years when a hidden figure waited beneath them, listening for a single set of footsteps fading into the valley. The forest remains quiet, but every creak of the railing reminds hikers of why the bridge earned its reputation and why investigators still study the case to understand what truly happened on the day Elon Mercer disappeared. The warning hidden in that old dashcam file. A forgotten dashcam file sat on an aging memory card for years before anyone bothered to play it, and the warning recorded in those shaky seconds pushed investigators back toward a case they thought had ended. The file came from a car abandoned in a storage lot behind a rural towing company, and the message inside it raised questions that no one could answer cleanly. Ryland Corbett was a 34-year-old landscape electrician who drove long routes across scattered mountain towns. He kept a careful routine so he could reach each job site before sunrise, and he relied on an old dashcam mounted beneath his rearview mirror to track mileage and protect himself from liability. Ryland preferred quiet roads, and he often took a narrow side highway that ran between pine forest and empty service pullouts. His friends said he liked that road because it gave him time to think without interruption. On a cool night in early autumn, Ryland left a job site later than normal. He told a coworker he planned to drive straight home rather than stay in town. He looked tired but steady, and he mentioned nothing about trouble. He bought fuel at a station near the highway entrance, grabbed a bottle of water, then headed toward the dim mountain road he used every week. His last confirmed call came through his work phone at roughly 9, and he said he expected to arrive home in 2 hours. He never arrived. A county deputy found his truck the next morning parked at a slight angle on the shoulder of a forest stretch that saw little overnight travel. The engine was cold, the doors were locked, and Ryland's tools sat neatly in the truck bed. There were no signs of a struggle and no indication he left the truck willingly. Search teams combed the woods for 2 days, but found nothing beyond faint footprints leading a short distance into the trees. Those prints vanished in a patch of dry needles where the ground was too firm to hold detail. The truck remained in evidence storage for months until the case grew cold. Eventually, it was transferred to a private towing lot. The dashcam stayed attached inside the cab, and no one checked the memory card again until nearly 8 years later when the towing company changed ownership. During a routine inventory sweep, an employee named Soren Lay removed the old dashcam because it rattled when he shut the door. He decided to check the card out of curiosity, and the first playable clip froze him in place. The file began with ordinary night driving. The headlights cast narrow beams over cracked asphalt as the forest shifted around the truck. A low hum filled the microphone, likely from the engine. Ryland's voice appeared once near the start, and he sounded annoyed about a vehicle that seemed to be trailing him for several miles. His tone was controlled, yet it carried an edge of confusion. He asked if the driver behind him needed to pass, then muttered that the vehicle kept fading out of view and returning again. A few minutes into the video, the headlights from a trailing vehicle appeared at the far edge of the frame. The light glared briefly, then vanished as if the driver dipped their beams or pulled back suddenly. The dashcam's date stamp suggested it matched the time frame of Ryland's disappearance, though the digits were partially corrupted. About 20 seconds later, Ryland whispered that he saw the trailing vehicle again through his side mirror. His voice tightened as he said the truck behind him had a broken fog light on the passenger side. That detail mattered because similar reports surfaced around that same highway during preceding months. The recording shifted as the truck rounded a bend. The microphone picked up a metallic rattle from the passenger door, followed by a faint rustling sound that seemed out of place. Analysts later believed the rustling came from something brushing along the truck exterior. Ryland's breathing quickened, and he said someone had stepped onto the road ahead. The camera captured no figure, yet the truck slowed sharply. Ryland spoke again, stating that he recognized something about the person's movement. His next sentence was barely audible, and investigators could not confirm whether he said the word drugged or dragged. The audio fractured when the trailing headlights suddenly filled the dashcam frame. The glare overwhelmed the sensor, and the clip flickered between brightness and near darkness. Ryland cursed under his breath and said he would pull into the next service turnout. The microphone caught the heavy thump of the truck hitting loose gravel. The truck angled toward the right shoulder, where a small turnout opened beneath leaning pines. The camera tilted as if the mounting bracket loosened. The final 2 seconds before the cut showed a blurred outline near the driver's side window. That outline appeared tall, with narrow shoulders, though the frame lacked enough clarity to define facial details. The dashcam file ended abruptly. The final second recorded a strange three-tone pattern that technicians believed came from the dashcam's internal warning system. Older models produced that sound during sudden vibration, but the pattern also triggered if the device detected manual interference. The combination of glare, sudden movement, and the abrupt cutoff suggested someone may have touched the dashcam before the recording terminated. Investigators re-examined witness reports from the night Rylan vanished. Several drivers traveling the mountain road claimed they saw a dark truck with a broken passenger fog light weaving across lanes. One driver described the truck slowing near the service turnout where Rylan's vehicle was later found. None of the witnesses could identify the driver, and the truck disappeared before deputies reached the area. A retired ranger who lived near the bend reported hearing a loud engine rev shortly after 9:30, followed by quiet for nearly an hour. The discovery of the dashcam file renewed interest in the case. Investigators mapped the route Rylan took that night and matched his comments in the clip to mile markers along the forest road. The moment he mentioned the broken fog light aligned with a curve known for concealment due to heavy tree cover. The point where he slowed matched the turnout used historically by maintenance crews who serviced power lines. That turnout had a narrow footpath leading deeper into the woods, though the path was overgrown by the time search teams inspected it again. The dashcam audio mentioning recognition gained particular interest. Rylan had completed several contracts in the same region during the months before his disappearance, and he frequently worked near remote properties. Detectives theorized that he may have encountered the same vehicle or person previously. His coworker mentioned an incident where Rylan complained about someone idling along a worksite access road late at night. Rylan believed the driver observed him for several minutes before speeding away. That report never escalated because Rylan dismissed it after a few days. Advanced audio processing on the final seconds of the clip revealed a faint background voice overlapping Rylan's last words. The voice spoke too quietly to capture full phrases, though analysts isolated a short fragment that sounded like "keep him there" or "keep it there." They could not determine if the voice came from inside the truck or through the partially open window. The possibility of a second person near the vehicle strengthened the idea that Rylan had pulled over because he believed he could talk to whoever stepped into the road. The three-tone warning pattern at the end of the clip became a focal point. Dashcam specialists explained that the pattern activated when the camera detected physical contact strong enough to tilt the lens. This aligned with the blurred outline near the window. Investigators believed someone reached into the cab or struck the dashcam mount, causing the device to shut off. They compared the timing of the audio cutoff with the impression marks found on the driver's side door, which appeared years earlier during the original inspection. Those marks seemed consistent with